All right, so thriving is going to be a major theme of the whole year, and this is going to start us off. So, loving the work and care of our lives. So, how are we defining thriving? We're defining thriving as enjoying and looking forward to the skillful work of one's life, or what we will call competence, giving and receiving care, which we'll call relatedness, and taking responsibility for our commitments and choices, which we'll call autonomy. And there's a sense that if you're pressing the limits of all those, your competence, relatedness, and autonomy, you're going to be growing near the limit of how you can grow. And that's another overtone of thriving. So ultimately, thriving is about enjoying the doing of your life. And it may help to think of some goods within thriving to understand thriving. When it comes to competence, we could call the main good flow. You may have heard of this term before or studied it before. Um, it's the experience of being so immersed in your work and enjoying your creative work that you lose track of space and time, and you're just in there doing it and creating and loving it at the oblivion of sort of the rest of the world. And then relatedness, the chief good we could call belonging, the sense of belonging that you get at school from the relations you have at school. The more and better relationships you have at school, the more you'll feel you belong there. At home, if your relationships are really strong and deep, you'll feel you belong there. In Dallas, in America, there's people who have a great sense of belonging in life and people who have a far lower sense of belonging in life. We're going to try to max that out in thriving. Autonomy, the chief good within it, we could call authorship. This sense that you're taking authorship of your life. You're not going to let somebody else write your story for you. You are going to affirm the writing of the story of your life and take responsibility for it. One good way to understand thriving is actually to sort of contrast it with the foil of succeeding. So think of thriving as about loving the doing of life, and succeeding as about valuing the outcomes of life, right? So we all know what it's like to love a class or a unit in a class, and you get way into it and you really like it. And often, when that's the case, and you work hard at it and you really get it and you love it, you do well on an assessment and you succeed in that regard. So you thrive and you succeed both. Um, uh, we all know what it's like to really dread the work of a class or a job or whatever, and you're just doing it to get the paycheck ultimately, whether it's a grade or money or status or whatever. And so that is a key difference between thriving and succeeding. Thriving is the loving of the doing, and succeeding is really more about outcomes. It might help even to think about the words, right? Succeeding has a noun form of it, success. So you can be a success after having done a bunch of stuff or even been given a bunch of stuff. You could be viewed as a success without actually be in the process of succeeding. Whereas thriving only happens in the doing. You have to, in order to thrive, you need to be thriving. There is no word that is the equivalent of being a success. Another difference between thriving and succeeding is what they're relative to. So we're going to mean thriving as relative to one's own potential. So that if I am pressing the limits of my own, of enjoying my own skillful work and the depth and breadth of my relationships, and taking as much responsibility as I can for my choices and commitments in my life and the authorship of my life, then I'm thriving. It doesn't really matter what other people are doing. They might be doing that at a higher level than I or at a lower level. All I can do is max out what I can do. And if I'm maxing it out, then I'm thriving. Success is a term we tend to use when we're judging people relative to each other. He's successful. Well, what does that mean? It means he tends to win more than the average. A successful team is a winning team. A successful person in whatever regard, in terms of money or status or career, popularity, possessions, whatever, it tends to me having more than the norm. So that's a pretty big difference between the two. And if you think about it, often the motivations are different, right, between thriving and succeeding. Thriving, there's no way to thrive without loving the doing of life, sort of by definition. If you're loving the work of your life and the doing of your life, and you're growing at the limits of what you could do, you're thriving. Um, Success, if we think about it, often the motivation can slip into anxiety, right? Competitive anxiety. Am I am I doing better than another person? And why would there be anxiety in that? Well, you don't really control what another person can do. You do have a lot of control over your own effort, right? And so you can press the limits of your own being, and you have control over that often. But succeeding, there's just so much you don't control. And if you have a goal that's really outside of your own control in many ways, it often produces anxiety. And so if we think about these things, they can be synergistic, and often they are, or they can be in tension and almost competing with each other. So uh, it, if you think about those areas of your life that you really love to do, and those disciplines that you really love to do and that you practice a lot because you love them, you tend to be successful in those disciplines. It can happen that you're not very successful in them. At least in my experience as a teacher, if you get boys thriving in a discipline, they tend to be successful in it too. On the other hand, there's plenty of times, right, where if you think about it, you could be successful and you generate outcomes, but that you didn't enjoy it along the way, right? And so it's quite possible to be successful and not to thrive. Usually, if you're thriving, you're also successful. And so they can be together and they can be in tension. They can be synergistic and they can be in competition. And then the question would be, which priority? Should you prioritize thriving and success is likely to follow? Or should you prioritize success and sort of cross your fingers that thriving will follow? So, for whatever it's worth, in my own experience, I was definitely early on in the success camp. My goal was competitively better outcomes than other people, and um, that led me not to enjoy the work, not to enjoy the practice, and I sort of went on natural ability as long as I could. And once that gave way and other people were working and I wasn't working, then to maintain success, well, you start by cutting corners and then you cheat and then you fib and then you lie and then you sort of invent a fictitious self that you present to the world as a success because you really want to appear as a success. And that's what happened to me in many ways. And it wasn't till decades later that I really started to love the work of my life and set my mind to make that happen. And wow, what a huge difference that has made. Well, let's think through an example of each. We probably all know what it's like to be on both sides of this issue. Have you ever found yourself like playing video games for hours because you've got work to do, but you don't enjoy that work? So you put it off and you put it off. And it's only when your anxiety gets really high that you have to study. So you throw yourself into it. It's late at night and you're all anxious about it and you don't sleep very well and you're cranky in the car ride on the way to school and you're studying it during your other classes, and then lo and behold, you pull it out and you get that good grade that you liked and you feel good for a little bit, but then, oh my gosh, here comes another assessment that's looming. So you get back into anxiety mode as sort of the cattle prod to make yourself work. And You get the grades you want, but that would be succeeding without thriving. And I think we all know what that's like. Well, contrast that with thriving and succeeding. And I hope we all know what this is like, but let's just try to make it as clear as possible as, like, yeah, this would be great to do all the time. But try to imagine that instead of that other situation, you really let yourself come to love discipline that you're studying, as an example. And so you study it a lot and you practice it and you get way into it. And you know what? You're good at it and you enjoy doing it. And then also you start to, you like the teacher more because the teacher's helping you understand this material. It matters to you, so now you really value the teacher more, and you get closer to the teacher, and kids in the class are helping you learn, and you get close to them, and maybe you study together, and you start thinking, like, maybe I'll do this as a major, maybe I'll do this in my life. And and you're like, wow, this is a pretty neat deal that I get to do this, and I enjoy coming to school because I get to study this. And maybe you even start thinking, wow, like, why don't I view math this way, or why don't I view writing this way? Like I could enjoy that too. And it spreads and it spreads and it spreads. And you do well on your tests. Why? Because you love doing it. You love to come to school. And so you're not in this anxiety motivated mode. You're in a love oriented mode. And it really just has all these positive ripple effects on your life. I hope we all know what that is. And now imagine a whole life that way. And along the same lines, just as a thought experiment, imagine you have a son someday. Just imagine it as a thought experiment. And here are your two options. You could guarantee one or the other of these for your son. As a man, he's motivated by love of the doing of his life, highly skilled at his profession, a great husband, loving father, has several passionate interests and hobbies, has many close friendships, is highly engaged in his community, takes responsibility for authoring his own life. You could nail that down for your son. Or you could say your son as a man is motivated primarily by anxiety and he has a lot of money and social status. And you had to choose between those two. And we talked about how these you don't have to choose between these two necessarily in your life, but just as a thought experiment, what if you could only guarantee one of those for your own son? Which would it be? Just as a way for you to try to come to terms with, which of these do you really value more? Thriving or succeeding? So my own thriving goal, and we're going to ask you to have these thriving goals, but my own thriving goal this year, as a new parent of twins, right? I really want to raise these girls to be motivated to love their lives, and so I'm just going to go out of my way to expose them to things that might delight them, drawing and birds and squirrels and blocks and singing and dancing and I just want them always to see people enjoying the doing, that they know that I love caring for them and it's not a burden that I do. And I want them to see that and feel it and digest that. That's my own thriving goal, is to thrive by being a parent, by helping my own children learn to thrive and not view the work of their life as some sort of chore that's only meant to attain an outcome. So that's what I'm going to work on this year. So takeaways, we would love it if you could look at our definition of thriving and then define it in your own words so that it sticks in your own mind. Also, you should be able to discuss the essential differences between thriving and succeeding. That would be really helpful for you to understand thriving. And then you should be able to briefly describe your own self assessment. Like, where are you on the succeeding, thriving continuum, on anxiety motivation versus love motivation? Just where are you? Like, self assess. And then determine an area of your life where you could thrive more, and it could be in any real aspect of your life where skillful work, relationships, and taking ownership of your own commitments with affirmation and joy, where that happens or can happen, and pick that area, and then sketch an outline. Like, how might you go about trying to make sure that you thrive more in that aspect of your life this year?